Today on Locked On Phoenix Suns, we learned one new wrinkle in the Ringer story that dropped on Tuesday that Kevin Durant may not be a sure thing to leave. Let's break down how likely that is, why the Suns may not have a better option, and what we could see the bidding war be like this summer. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Phoenix Suns. I'm Brendon Kleen, a staff writer at Awful Announcing and a credentialed Suns media member. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Thursday. Don't forget Locked On Suns, free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. So click that follow or subscribe button. Do what thousands of other Suns fans have already done. Become an everydayer. Get locked on to the Phoenix Suns right here each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Let's get right to it. I am traveling today, so I'm knocking out a solo episode while Ben is at work. And the Kevin Durant rumor mill is reheating rapidly. There is a lot day by day coming out. We had the Ringer story, which I will go back through a little bit here to start. Shams Charania went on ESPN and gave a list of teams that he said there was, quote, mutual interest in. And I just think we're getting a little bit of clarity as to what kinds of packages the Suns could be looking at this summer. So we'll go through all of it. But I think the biggest question is, will Kevin Durant actually leave, right? And the Ringer piece that we talked about on yesterday's show and that I referenced multiple times already here is it seemed to leave the door open, right? You had Book saying he would love to play with Kevin next season. Not exactly a surprise. Of course he would. Who wouldn't? And I guess in theory, I put it at 5 to 10% chance that Durant would stay put. It's not a sure thing that he's gone. But here's the thing you have to ask yourself, right? Is there a pathway to genuinely look yourself in the mirror? If you're Matt Ishbia, if you are Josh Bartlestein, if you are James Jones, or maybe somebody who might replace James Jones, can you look yourself in the mirror with what you have on the table in your war chest of assets and say, we can go into next season feeling like we have a better chance next season than what this year has been, which is an abject failure that is likely to result in missing the play-in, let alone the playoffs? Can you actually credibly make that case to yourself when you have Bradley Beal's contract looming, which is a big albatross roadblock to doing anything else? So that's step one. Can you get off of that? Well, you have these 3 first-round picks and a couple of seconds or whatever they have left there, I think 2 or 3 seconds. You're probably looking at the majority of that stuff having to be attached to Bradley Beal just to get a team to take him. We haven't seen in the modern NBA a team that would take a player with this many years left on that expensive of a contract unless they also have a bad contract that you can swap places with. And even then, we haven't seen it with so many years left. And I'll apologize because there's power washing and angry dogs happening in my apartment. But you don't see it. John Wall for Russell Westbrook was like one example where this happened, but I believe that was in both guys with only 1 or 2 years left, and that was a pretty desperate move for two teams that, it was a last gasp. Maybe that's what this would be, but when you have the Kevin Durant thing sitting there, that's hard to say. Beyond that, you're looking at, okay, let's say you get off of Beal with minimal damage to that war chest. Let's say it's not all your firsts and all your seconds and whatever. Of course, you're not attaching Ryan Dunn or Oso Ighodaro to that. And maybe you're even able to avoid it being this year's picks. I don't know what that would look like, but that would qualify as like a best case scenario. You draft another player with the Cavs pick at 29. You maybe, roll that over. You got younger. You don't have Beal's contract in the way. Maybe you get under the second apron. That's all like you'd be over the moon that could even happen. Well, then you got to make the team better. You got to get better. And it can't just be another coaching change. It can't just be internal development that all of a sudden Ryan Dunn is some great standout player. That's not looking yourself in the mirror and being reasonable and realistic that you're going to get better. And so at a certain point when you have a Kevin Durant extension, and if you don't extend him, he's on the last year of his contract. He's in a walk year. You also have a Devin Booker extension possibility, which, that's not a threat that he could leave, but that's a sort of line in the sand, respect conversation that we see with these superstar players. With both of those dominoes still sitting there, it's really hard to go forward with committing more money and more years to that duo if you don't think you're going to be able to get yourself out of this rut. And so that is why when we talked about yesterday that Ben and I both did not really buy the idea of Kevin Durant staying here, to me it has nothing to do with Kevin Durant. It is all because of the situation that the Suns are in, not to mention the disrespect of how they handled their business at the deadline. And so where does that take us? Well, I think the other thing to look at is, before you fully turn the page, is what is the best team around Booker or Booker and Durant, if you're still holding out hope for that? What does that even look like, right? Because that's the other factor. I guess I could have started there, but regardless, this is the question that I put out on X where I said, ignore the cap, ignore the aprons. In a vacuum, how would you ideally build a contender around Booker and Durant? What would that team actually look like? And I got a lot of answers that I thought were pretty decent. Some people are still obsessed with the idea of like a lead playmaker. I agree that they need another guy who can break down a defense, but I don't think we just saw the Tyus Jones thing. We even saw the Chris Paul thing where he was sort of in no man's land in terms of his role during that half season back in 2023, where all of a sudden he's spotting up a lot and not really doing Chris Paul things. I just don't think that that's what it is. But, somebody said, well, what if they could have traded Paul for Porzingis, CP for Porzingis instead of Beal, considering that Porzingis obviously changed teams that offseason too, and kept Kamara. Like, even just that would have been a start. And I agree. Other people said, Booker at the 1, tall 3-and-D wings, and a 5 who can space the floor. I happen to believe a spacing 5, no matter if Durant is here or if it's just Booker as the main guy next season, is a must. You at least have to have an option of a floor spacing center, because we've just never really seen that with Booker. And considering that he's not somebody who's an overpowering downhill scorer, the more space, the better. And so that one I really agree with. Some people got more specific, like one that it was a quote tweet of my post I'll pull up now, where they said, actual lineups people were throwing out there. Somebody said Marcus Smart, Aaron Gordon, Miles Turner around Book and KD. I agree with all of this. Those types of players, and like I said, the question I asked was in a vacuum. Somebody else said Lonzo, OG, and Lively. I think that would be interesting, even though that's not really a spacing center. It's all good. But again, I come back to the caliber of players you're talking about when I give you that. There's really no cheap, easily attainable version of those players, especially with how little the Suns have to work with, right? Maybe Ryan Dunn can be one of those OG, Aaron Gordon. I mean, he's not as big as those dudes, but that type of player, maybe Iguodaro, he develops into a smaller version of somebody like a Derek Lively in terms of the things that he does, not quite obviously the size and athleticism and everything, but, maybe. But the problem becomes that you can't acquire those players with what you have, and you can't even get close, right? I agree that the Suns went about things wrong in the beginning, but the reality is this is where they are, and they're no closer to getting these types of guys that everybody gratefully listed off and answered my question with. And that again brings you back to maybe you take those same lessons with building around Booker for the next year or two, and eventually whatever that other star you maybe try to get in the future to pair with him as you build that out. That is maybe how you're going to have to operate with it, rather than saying this is what it should be with Booker and Durant. And so all signs to me, unless they can pull a rabbit out of a hat and get off Beal, get under the second apron, and still have some things to play with, which I just don't see how that adds up, it unfortunately leads back to trading Kevin Durant. And so we got some news this week from Shams Charania, from Clutch Points, from that Ringer piece that I think we can start to understand a little bit better. I also did some research on what this could look like to start to piece it together of what the sweepstakes are going to look like come the NBA offseason. So let's dive in next. First, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NCAA tournament is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. There really are no massive favorites to bet on in the world of college basketball anymore. I have told you for years that is the go-to to get those bonus bets, bonus bucks, whatever you want to call them. But the NHL, not too bad. You got the Colorado Avalanche minus 385 favorites on the road against Chicago. There's always some MLB stuff that you can mess with. All sorts of places to go, or maybe you just try your luck. Maybe you just go Duke. I mean, look, they're probably going to win, right? And then you can really dig in, have some fun on the FanDuel app with those $200 in bonus bets with that first $5 bet win. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right, let's keep the show rolling here. We got Shams Charania on the Pat McAfee Show on Wednesday giving an update as to the suitors for Kevin Durant. And the list was as follows: Houston Rockets, Miami Heat, San Antonio Spurs, New York Knicks, and Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, the Spurs one is a little bit new, and it adds to a report earlier in the week from Brett Siegel of Clutch Points that I referenced on Wednesday's episode, where and not only did Shams report this, but the context for that list was mutual interest, right? Mutual interest. So not just teams that really, really pretty please wanted Kevin Durant, but apparently some teams that felt like through the grapevine of, the NBA transaction time that Durant would have been open to going there. Now, that can change based on how the playoffs go or what else those teams do. I mean, heck, the Spurs don't even necessarily have a full-time coach right now, and all these sorts of things that are up in the air, and February already was 2 months ago. But that's interesting, okay? And I think when I look at that list, a few secondary things come to mind, and I will close the show by going through what the core of each team's package would be, what the questions about that package could end up looking like, and which one I'm leaning toward right now. But just big picture, two things jump out to me about that list, okay? Because not all those teams are the same in terms of their cap situation or their roster. The first one is sort of obvious. It's the biggest barrier to getting a deal done, which is in the case of Minnesota, Miami, and New York, the aprons come into play, right? So the Wolves are over the second apron, which means until either the Suns or them got under that second apron, they effectively cannot make a trade because neither team can take back more salary than they send out. I mean, you guys know that because that's the rule we've been talking about with the Suns forever. But if you think about it, the only way for two teams over the second apron to trade with each other is if the salaries were exactly 1-to-1, and that's just not really going to happen. So that's one. The Knicks and the Heat, I believe, are over or near the first aprons, which is easier but still a little bit difficult to make a trade happen. There's hard cap things that come into play when you make a trade. There's less, you can get back more than you send out, but not as much as the rest of the league. You still have a limit on yourself, even though doesn't have to be 100% equal. So that's the first thing. Where are these other teams at in terms of the tax and the aprons? And is a deal really even feasible? The other thing when I look at that list is what they would send back. Is that going to keep the Suns on more of a win now trajectory where they can potentially still be in the play-in mix next year and tread water and do all that, and not give up a high lottery pick to Houston, or I guess next year their pick goes to Brooklyn, I think, or Washington. Washington. That would be nice. Or is the package you're getting back from the teams on this list going to send you into a full-on rebuild? And I don't even know what a rebuild looks like when you don't have your picks, but is it getting back picks from other teams? Is it a player that's really young as the centerpiece of the trade where they're going to be too raw to really be a co-pilot and a number 1B or something with Devin Booker next season? So, like off the top of my head, the Heat package is probably a rebuild type package, if we're being honest with ourselves. Maybe the Spurs package is kind of like that. Whereas, the Knicks, if they could even credibly get into the race, they're sending back a vet, it's like Towns or McHale or OG, because that's all they really have. Timberwolves, Rockets, maybe it's kind of in the middle of those two. And so, okay, we'll get to the packages in a more concrete way to close things out. But if that's the list, then you start to think about value, right? Because I'm already telling you the Knicks option, and we've hit on this on the pod for a few weeks now, the Knicks continuing to be in this conversation is weird because they just don't really have a lot. So what is it going to actually take to get Durant, right? And part of that is really difficult, just like it was when the Suns got him. Because we don't know. A player 36 going on 37 who would be signing an extension but is also still at an all-NBA level, we don't know what that is equivalent to in terms of trade value. We can't really say. And so my question becomes, is there any historical precedent that we can look to? And I mean, you guys tell me in the comments if one comes to mind, but the kind of the off the top of my head, sort of, in the past few years of this iteration of NBA trades, the Gobert thing was once in a million. The Wolves were desperate. All sorts of things happened there. It was also just an overpay. It was probably a bad trade, so you shouldn't keep a bad trade as precedent if you're trying to look forward with the rest of how the NBA will act. But I looked at Damian Lillard. Now, Lillard was 5 years younger or something than KD will be now when he got traded, but he was breaking down, right? If you remember, he missed almost a whole season with the abdominal injury. He's a small guard. He had, he wasn't the peak of his powers, Damian Lillard, anymore. But I believe he's still on the contract that he was on when he got traded 2 years ago. And so he just had a lot longer on his contract. And again, he was still quite a bit younger. It's not perfect. And I don't think it's where we can go. But maybe if you say, hey, take that as a starting point and hack a little bit off of it, maybe we can get there. So it was Ayton, Kamara, Holiday, 1 first and 2 swaps, and then Holiday ended up giving them, I believe, 2 more firsts on top of that. So, I mean, maybe you take the Holiday part out of that, and maybe you're getting close to what the Suns could get. A iffy young player like Ayton, a sort of high floor or low floor, high ceiling type of lottery pick, or lottery ball, not lottery pick in the NBA, but maybe he could work out type guy like Kamara, and then 1, 2, 3 picks somewhere in there, split the difference on picks versus swaps. That might be what we're looking at. I think that that's actually a pretty realistic framework. And so I still am skeptical of the Knicks, if I'm being honest, but almost every other team, not almost, every other team, Houston, Miami, San Antonio, and Minnesota, I think they all can check those boxes and get into the mix on a package like that if we're using that as a rough framework. So let's get into the packages. Can they cross the Lillard line? I guess let's call it that, or the Lillard minus Holiday line, although that doesn't ring quite as nicely. And which one's the best? Next. First, today's show is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Daylight savings snuck up on us again. And if you're feeling that change of the clock, 5 Hour Energy has your back. The extra sunshine means more time for fun, but sometimes you need a little boost to power through. Maybe you are staying up late watching D-backs games lately, although they've been on the East Coast this week. Maybe you are up late watching the NCAA tournament, squeezing in a round of golf after work, or just trying to keep up with the day-to-day of life, work, kids, whatever it might be. 5 Hour Energy gives you the quick, refreshing pick-me-up whenever you need it to get through all of it. Here's the deal. With longer days, it can be nice to go outside, get a hike, especially before it gets hot here. And the tropical burst flavor is supposed to be getting you in the spirit of the spring and summer with those tropical flavors. You can also get it on the go at a convenience store, at a gas station, whatever it might be, in addition to the bigger packs that you can get at 5hourenergy.com. So go there, head to 5hourenergy.com, find over 15 flavors to choose from, get started, check out what you might like: watermelon, blue raspberry, peach mango, or that tropical burst. Build a 12-pack, build a 24-pack, get it delivered right to your door. Then you know, hey, if I'm out on the run, I know which ones I like. I know when I need it. I know what I need. I know what I like. If you need one now, grab it there, or go to 5hourenergy.com, stock up today, and stay energized. All right, closing out the show. Houston, Miami, San Antonio, New York, or Minnesota. That's the list according to Shams Charania. Now, I'm not here to tell you that the list couldn't change or grow, and I will just say something off the top here before I even get further, all right? Where Kevin Durant wants to go will dictate a lot of this. I've said that from the beginning. I think he does hold a lot of leverage because he is heading into the final year of his contract. Teams aren't going to want to acquire Kevin Durant if they don't know they're going to get him for more than one season. And if they do, well, they're going to give the Suns a value that's equivalent to, we're only getting 1 year of Kevin Durant, like the Kawhi Leonard thing in Toronto. And so we don't know that yet. We haven't heard from KD. We haven't even heard a leak from KD about where he would want to go. But again, Shams did say mutual interest. And we walked through why the Suns have to be realistic with themselves, and they're under some pressure to probably move him and try to figure out whatever's going to be next for them. So when we talk about the list could get bigger, let me just say, all right, Boston, Denver, I think you could hear both those names come up. Dallas, if they feel like Kyrie will be back sometime next season and they don't want to waste this post-Luka window that they might believe that they still have, maybe they come out of the woodwork. I would even throw the Lakers and Clippers just because they always are, gunning for a title and they may be in the mix. So, okay, that's like another half dozen teams that could be there. But just focusing right now on Shams's list that were in play at the deadline, and who I already told you that aside from the Knicks, I think check that they kind of cross that Lillard line, let's get through it. Let's get into it. The Rockets. I'm going to tell you what I think each team's package would be built around, and then like the question that I have about it. All right. So I actually think the Rockets package would be built around the 2025 Suns pick. That's the most valuable thing the Suns would probably be getting back if they dealt with Houston, okay? Because I don't think they're getting Şengün. I don't think they're getting Amen Thompson. And so maybe Jabari Smith's part of the trade, but I think the Suns pick, especially now that they're going to be in the lottery, is going to be more valuable. And they're probably not going to do that deal, Houston, until they know where that pick is. And then maybe it's not even a question anymore if it goes up too high. But that's what it would be built around. The question, the concern, the thing I'm tacking to the wall and keeping an eye on is Jalen Green. Because if I'm the Suns, it's not a no-go, but I'm trying pretty hard. If the Rockets want Jalen Green to be involved in the trade, I'm trying pretty hard for that to involve him going to a third team. Because there's already on a team with Devin Booker, it makes very little sense. You're probably talking about Jalen Green coming off the bench. He makes $33 million next season, and he just hasn't gotten a lot better the way you would really want when you're giving him that extension, or even frankly when you're drafting him as high as he went back in the 2021 draft. It's just not a good situation. I would not want it. But if you can't find that third team and Houston is insistent and they kind of are playing ball with, maybe you get your pick back and you get some other stuff you like, but you have to take Jalen Green, then I'm saying you got to give me more. You have to, in the same way we talk about with Bradley Beal, the Suns have to attach stuff to get off of him. I think you tell the Rockets that. You say, if you want to get off Jalen Green in this trade, you got to give us an extra pick, or you got to give us, whatever it might be, like another player. Cam Whitmore, maybe he wasn't going to be in it, now he's in it. Whatever that looks like. You got to draw a line there, because I just think Green is really unappealing to me if I'm the Suns. Miami. This one, the center of the package and the question are one and the same. I think that the package has to be built around Kel'el Ware, the player that Miami just picked in the lottery, who has had, to me, a little bit under the radar, awesome rookie season. Especially considering there were some of those motor questions and whatever that cropped up later in the draft process, which we were all paying attention to because he was somebody on the Suns' radar. I really feel like he'd be a huge get. He has a 61 true shooting percentage. He's already a positive in terms of the advanced metrics on the defensive end. He's blocking 5% of opponents' shots when he's on the court. And he's had some big scoring and rebounding nights just organically as he's gotten minutes. And he's only 20. So to me, that would be huge. That might even be my favorite player the Suns could get. But the question on this package is, is he actually on the table? And I'm not so sure. I don't know if that's a bridge too far for the Miami Heat, They just got a diamond in the rough in the lottery, the late lottery, like they have time and again between Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero. And they obviously, rightly so, they trust themselves to develop players like that. And so what do you do if Ware's not included? I don't think Jovic or Jaquez, or I believe Miami might have their pick this year, and it will be a lottery pick. Is that enough? I don't think that what else they have is going to be enough, especially when you're talking about the salary that you're getting from the Heat is probably Andrew Wiggins. It's maybe Duncan Robinson. Those just aren't players that move the needle. So I really need good stuff, and I don't know if they have it if it's not Ware. The Spurs. I think that the Spurs package is built around Devin Vassell and or a far-off pick, okay? Because the Spurs quietly, not so quietly, they've really pulled off some good trades recently. And to me, they have some very tasty future picks. They have some Atlanta pick swaps and unprotected picks in the next 3 drafts that are very interesting. They have a Dallas and Minnesota pick swap in the 2030 draft. And they have a Kings draft swap in the 2031 draft. All of those would be very, very interesting to me if I'm the Suns. And so maybe it's not even Vassell at all. Maybe it's those picks, and I would imagine the Spurs would kind of have to get off of one of those, and maybe they hold back Vassell and you get Keldon Johnson and Harrison Barnes or something instead. But you're not getting Stephon Castle, and you're not getting the Spurs' own pick this season. I think those are too valuable to see that happen. My question is, it's not really a question, but it's just something to pay attention to here. the Spurs are the team where it would be easiest for the Suns to get under the second apron in a trade for Kevin Durant. And that's something that I haven't mentioned in this episode, but we've talked about plenty before on the pod is, Gerald Bourguet, I believe, has reported this, and it's kind of just obvious. Obviously, the Beal thing is part of it, but the Suns are, if they're going to blow up their team, they're going to want to get under the second apron. They're not trying to pay hand over foot gobs and gobs of tax dollars for a team that they're basically admitting is going to take a step back next season. That would be pretty ridiculous. Okay, so what would the Suns be doing there, right? How would they approach this, and would the Spurs stand out as more appealing of a partner because they could get under the second apron more easily, because the Spurs have a bunch of room under the luxury tax to take back a lot of money, more than they're sending out, and not really have to worry about it. Last but not least, Minnesota. Package will be built around Jaden McDaniels. There's obviously some other stuff at play here. Naz Reid is in the mix, of course. Maybe Rob Dillingham if they're really desperate. I mean, I don't know. Dillingham and McDaniels, I just don't think is going to happen. Maybe you could get a DiVincenzo out of it. Maybe a Conley appeals to you to try to, get his last year of probably his career and do the Chris Paul effect, help your culture. I don't know. But it's McDaniels as the core of it, in my opinion. And the question is Julius Randle. Very similar to the Jalen Green thing we started with here. I just am not interested in acquiring Julius Randle, and it's honestly less about him as a player, because he's obviously way better than Jalen Green, but it is much more about the fact that he's a unique fit as a player, and I don't love having to shoehorn him in. But the other thing is he is going into the final year of his contract, and so he is basically needing to be paid, or you're losing him. And so maybe you just bite the bullet and lose him. Like, you could even just buy him out or something. I don't know. I mean, it's not like it's impossible. But if that's a decent amount of what you're getting back in a trade, I'd at least like that player to be able to play for me, to be a good fit, to be somebody I could maybe have in place for a couple years or more while this transitional period happens, as you cycle out the KD Beal era and you try to figure out what's next. I mean, even Wiggins, who I mentioned with Miami, like, at least that's somebody who can play for you and be like a replacement level player or a little better. He has plenty of things that he adds to a basketball team. Randall, sure, he has that too, but if you're losing him, and he's frustrated trying to get a contract all season, then it's not a great situation to put yourself in. So I would really draw a hard line on Randall. Problem is, Minnesota just doesn't have a lot of other money to send. And I guess like McDaniels, DiVincenzo, and Conley, like, that gets you there, basically. So maybe you can do it and avoid the Randall factor playing in. But otherwise, you're finding a third team for Randall. You're getting into a bigger trade and a lot more complexities. So that's the big thing that hinges on. If the Suns can get Kel'el Ware, I think the Miami deal is the one that appeals to me most. If not, I think the Spurs deal. But to circle all the way back, the problem with both of those trades is, even though they're more interesting to me, they are much more in that full rebuild type of thing. You're waiting for Ware to develop. You are, hoping that you can maybe flip that valuable pick you get from San Antonio for something else, but that doesn't just materialize out of thin air. You got to wait and feel that out and develop your package to send. That doesn't jive with what Book just said about he's never going to be part of a rebuild. So a lot of things to consider for the Suns. None of them are going to be easy. That is what happens when you screw up a lot of important decisions and you end up a little desperate. And that is what the Suns are. That will wrap us up. Hit follow or subscribe if you have not already. Become an everydayer. We got more content coming for you. Suns at Boston, Suns at New York this weekend. And there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Before long, we will have clarity on if the Suns are looking for a new head coach, looking for a new general manager, what the draft might be and entail for this team. So you know where to go. You don't even have to go. You're already here. Keep it here, and we'll talk to you next time.